The strangest thing about destiny is that it rarely knocks on the front door. Sometimes it slips in wearing a maid's uniform. The first time I saw Carter Manor, it looked less like a home and more like something carved out of a billionaire's imagination. The wrought iron gates stretched nearly a quarter-mile from the main road. Beyond them stood a three-story stone mansion overlooking the Hudson River, its windows glowing amber against the fading October sky. I tightened my grip on the handle of my suitcase and told myself to breathe. I had spent the last 4 years moving from one temporary job to another. Hotels, private homes, retirement estates. None of them had prepared me for this place. My name is Grace Sullivan, and on that cold Thursday evening, I became the newest maid at one of the most powerful households in New York. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes as I followed the long pathway toward the employee entrance. The air smelled like fallen leaves and rain. Somewhere in the distance, a fountain trickled softly. Everything about the estate felt expensive, controlled, perfect, which was exactly why I didn't belong there. "You're late," a woman said the moment I stepped inside. She stood behind a polished reception desk, her silver hair pulled into a flawless bun. Her posture was so straight it made military officers seem relaxed. "I'm sorry," I replied. "The bus was delayed." Her eyes studied me for a moment before she handed me a folder. "Mrs. Whitmore, head house manager. Follow the rules, and we won't have any problems." I nodded. Problems were the last thing I wanted. The truth was, I hadn't come to Carter Manor because it offered excellent pay. I hadn't come because of the benefits either. I had come for a reason I couldn't tell anyone. A reason buried so deep in the past that even speaking about it felt dangerous. Mrs. Whitmore led me through a maze of hallways lined with oil paintings and crystal chandeliers. Every surface gleamed. Every corner seemed untouched by time. "You'll be responsible for the East Wing," she explained. "Guest rooms, library maintenance, light housekeeping." "Understood. And one more thing." She stopped walking. "Avoid drawing attention to yourself." I almost laughed. Drawing attention had never been my specialty. "Trust me," I said quietly. "I'm very good at staying unnoticed." For the first time, something flickered across her face. Not amusement, something closer to concern. Then it disappeared. She opened a door and showed me a small staff room overlooking the gardens. "Dinner is served at 6. Orientation begins tomorrow." I thanked her and waited until she left before sitting on the edge of the bed. The room was simple, clean, comfortable, more than I'd expected. Slowly, I reached beneath the collar of my sweater and pulled out the silver necklace I always wore. The chain was old, worn smooth with time. Hanging from it was a tiny key no larger than my thumb. My fingers closed around it automatically, the way they always did when I felt nervous. The key had been with me for as long as I could remember, along with a promise, along with questions nobody had ever answered. A sudden knock startled me. I slipped the necklace back beneath my shirt and opened the door. One of the younger maids stood outside. "Dinner starts in 10 minutes, she said with a friendly smile. "You should probably hurry." I thanked her and followed her downstairs. The staff dining hall buzzed with quiet conversation. Plates clinked. Coffee steamed. Laughter drifted between tables. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then the room went silent. Every voice stopped at once. Every chair seemed to freeze in place. I looked toward the doorway. A tall man had just entered the corridor beyond the dining room. He wasn't surrounded by security. He didn't need to be. Power seemed to move with him naturally. Dark hair, sharp features, a charcoal gray suit that looked custom-made. His expression remained calm as he walked past the open doorway. Yet somehow everyone noticed. Everyone watched. Ethan Carter, 35 years old, tech billionaire, business icon, the owner of the estate. I only saw him for 3 seconds before he disappeared down the hall. But something strange happened. Just before he vanished from view, he stopped, turned slightly, and looked directly toward the dining room. Toward me. The moment lasted less than a heartbeat. Then he continued walking. Conversation slowly resumed around me. Nobody seemed surprised. Nobody except me. Because for one impossible second, I could have sworn Ethan Carter wasn't looking at my face. He was looking at the necklace hidden beneath my sweater. And somehow, deep in my chest, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years suddenly returned. Fear. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the pale gray light filtering through the curtains and remembered Carter Manor. The estate felt different at 5:30 in the morning. Quieter. Larger somehow. The hallways seemed to stretch forever beneath pools of soft golden light. I tied my hair back, adjusted my uniform, and reported for duty. By 7 o'clock, I was dusting bookshelves in the East Wing library. The room was enormous, lined with dark walnut shelves that reached nearly 20 feet high. Thousands of books filled the walls. Some looked older than the country itself. I moved carefully between the shelves, running a cloth across polished wood while trying to ignore the strange feeling lingering from the night before. I kept replaying that moment in my mind. The way Ethan Carter had stopped. The way his eyes had settled on me. Or rather, on the necklace hidden beneath my sweater. It made no sense. He could not possibly know anything about me. Nobody here could. That was the entire point. I was reaching for a shelf near the window when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, measured, confident. My stomach tightened instantly. The library was supposed to be empty. I turned around and nearly dropped the cloth in my hand. Ethan Carter stood 15 feet away. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows behind him, casting long shadows across the floor. Up close, he looked younger than he had from a distance. Not softer, just less untouchable. His blue eyes moved briefly across the room before settling on me. You are the new maid. It was not a question. His voice was calm and controlled. Yes, sir. He nodded once. Grace Sullivan. Hearing my full name from his mouth sent an uncomfortable chill through me. Of course he knew my name. He owned the estate. Still, something about it felt different. Personal. Are you settling in? He asked. Yes, sir. Good. The conversation should have ended there. Instead, his gaze lingered. Not on my face. Lower. Toward the chain partially visible above the collar of my uniform. I instinctively touched the fabric covering it. His eyes sharpened immediately. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. That necklace, he said quietly. My heartbeat stumbled. What about it? For a moment, he did not answer. He simply stared, like someone trying to remember a dream that kept slipping away. Nothing, he finally said. It looks familiar. Familiar. The word echoed inside my head. Before I could respond, another voice called his name from the hallway. Ethan glanced toward the door. Whatever thought had occupied him vanished behind the same controlled expression. Enjoy your first week, Miss Sullivan. Then he turned and walked away. I stood frozen long after he disappeared. My fingers tightened around the tiny key hidden beneath my sweater. Familiar. That was impossible. Unless... No. I forced the thought away immediately. I had spent years making sure nobody could connect me to the past. Years making sure certain secrets stayed buried. Yet as I returned to dusting the shelves, I noticed something sitting alone on a nearby reading table. A framed photograph. I had not seen it earlier. Curiosity pulled me closer. The picture showed a younger Ethan standing beside an elegant woman with bright eyes and a warm smile. His mother, I assumed. But it was not her face that stole my breath. It was the silver necklace around her neck. The necklace hanging there looked almost identical to the one hidden beneath my uniform. And for the first time since arriving at Carter Manor, I began to wonder if coming here had been a mistake. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photograph in the library. I saw the woman wearing a necklace that looked almost identical to mine. By morning, I had convinced myself it was a coincidence. It had to be. Thousands of necklaces existed in the world. Similar designs meant nothing. Similar designs could not explain the uneasy feeling growing inside my chest. The estate was unusually busy that afternoon. Several guests were expected for a charity board meeting, and Mrs. Whitmore had everyone moving twice as fast as usual. I spent most of the day preparing sitting rooms, arranging fresh flowers, and polishing surfaces that already looked perfect. By 3 o'clock, rain clouds had rolled across the Hudson. Soft gray light filled the windows, turning the mansion into a maze of shadows and reflections. I was carrying a stack of folded linens through the west corridor when someone stepped around the corner unexpectedly. The collision happened before either of us could react. The linens slipped from my arms and scattered across the polished floor. Oh my goodness, I am so sorry, I said immediately, kneeling to gather them. No, that was my fault. The voice belonged to an older woman. Elegant, warm, familiar somehow. I looked up and froze. She appeared to be in her late 60s, dressed in a navy suit with a strand of pearls around her neck. Her silver hair framed kind blue eyes that studied me with surprising intensity. For a second, neither of us moved. Then her gaze dropped toward the necklace chain visible near my collar. Her expression changed instantly. Not fear, not shock. Recognition. Pure recognition. My pulse accelerated. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. "Yes." My voice sounded thinner than usual. "I am fine." She continued staring for another second before forcing a smile. "Good." Something about her reaction unsettled me. Before I could say anything else, Mrs. Whitmore appeared at the far end of the hallway. "Grace, the guest will arrive shortly." I stood quickly. "Yes, ma'am." When I looked back, the older woman was still watching me, as if she wanted to say something but had decided against it. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur, yet I could not stop thinking about her face, or the way she had looked at my necklace. By evening, the charity event was underway. The mansion glowed with music, conversation, and the soft clink of crystal glasses. I remained in the background, serving refreshments and avoiding attention exactly as I had promised, at least until I entered the gallery room. The space displayed dozens of framed photographs from the Carter family's history, business milestones, charity projects, family gatherings. I was replacing a tray of empty glasses when one photograph caught my eye. My breath stopped. The image showed Ethan at around 10 years old standing beside his mother. Behind them stood another woman, younger, smiling, holding a little girl no older than 4. My hands began to shake, because I recognized the woman instantly. I had seen her face thousands of times growing up, in old keepsake boxes, in faded photographs, in memories I had spent years trying not to revisit. The woman in the picture was my mother. Before I could process what I was seeing, a deep voice spoke behind me. "Interesting photograph, isn't it?" Every muscle in my body locked. Slowly, I turned around. Ethan Carter stood only a few feet away. His eyes moved from the photograph to my face. And for the first time since arriving at Carter Manor, I realized he was no longer merely curious. He was starting to suspect something. My mind raced so fast that I barely heard the music drifting through the gallery. Ethan stood beside me, waiting. Not impatiently, not aggressively, simply waiting, as though he already knew that silence often revealed more than questions ever could. I forced myself to look back at the photograph. My mother smiled from a moment frozen nearly 20 years earlier. The sight made my chest ache. "It is beautiful," I said carefully. Ethan studied me. "You seem familiar with it." My throat tightened. "Not really." The lies sounded weak even to me. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Most people glance at that picture and move on. You look like you had seen a ghost." A nervous laugh escaped before I could stop it. Maybe I was just surprised. By what? I searched desperately for an answer. Fortunately, a group of guests entered the gallery at that exact moment. Their conversation filled the room and broke the tension. Ethan's attention shifted briefly toward them. It gave me the opening I needed. "Excuse me, sir. I should get back to work." For a second, I thought he might stop me. Instead, he stepped aside. Of course, by the time the event ended, exhaustion weighed on me like concrete. The mansion finally grew quiet after midnight. Staff members returned to their quarters. Lights dimmed throughout the estate. Rain tapped softly against the windows. I should have gone to bed. Instead, I found myself standing outside a storage room at the far end of the east wing. Nobody used it anymore. At least that was what one of the maids had told me earlier. My pulse quickened as I slipped a small key from beneath my sweater. The silver key, the one I had carried my entire life. The metal slid in perfectly. Every breath left my lungs at once. For several seconds I simply stood there, frozen. Then I turned the key. A soft click echoed through the hallway. The door unlocked. Fear and curiosity collided inside me. Somehow, the key I had carried for 20 years belonged to a hidden room inside Carter Manor. A room connected to Ethan's mother. My mother. Or perhaps both. The realization sent chills down my spine. I pushed the door open a few inches. Dust floated through a narrow beam of moonlight. Shelves lined the walls. Boxes sat stacked from floor to ceiling. And directly across the room, resting alone on a small wooden desk, lay a framed photograph. Even from the doorway, I recognized the faces immediately. One was Ethan's mother. The other was my mother, standing side by side, smiling like sisters. My legs felt unsteady as I stepped into the room. The old floorboards creaked softly beneath my shoes. Dust covered everything. It smelled like time itself had been sealed inside and forgotten. Moonlight spilled through a narrow window, painting silver lines across the boxes and shelves. For years, I had carried questions nobody could answer. Now, for the first time, It felt like the answers were standing right in front of me. I moved toward the photograph on the desk. My mother looked younger than I remembered from the few pictures I had growing up. Beside her stood Ethan's mother, smiling with one arm around her shoulders. They looked close, not like acquaintances, not like employer and employee. They looked like family. My fingers trembled as I lifted the frame. A folded piece of paper slipped from behind it and landed on the desk. I froze. The paper was yellowed with age. Carefully, I unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant and familiar, not because I had seen it before, but because it matched the notes my mother used to leave inside birthday cards. My breath caught. The note was dated 20 years earlier. Most of the message had faded, but one sentence remained clear enough to read. If anything happens, the key must stay with Grace. My heart nearly stopped. Grace. My name. I stared at the words until they blurred. The room suddenly felt smaller, colder, as though the walls themselves were watching me. My mother had known about this place. She had known about the key. She had known I would eventually come here. But why? I turned toward the shelves. Dozens of storage boxes lined the walls. One in particular stood out. Unlike the others, it carried no label. Only a small silver emblem, shaped like a key. The same key hanging around my neck. I crossed the room and knelt beside it. The lid opened easily. Inside were letters. Dozens of them, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Photographs sat beneath them, along with newspaper clippings and old documents. My pulse thundered in my ears. I picked up the top letter. Before I could unfold it, a sound echoed from somewhere beyond the room. Footsteps. My entire body stiffened. Someone was coming. Quickly, I returned the letter to the box and listened. The footsteps grew louder. Steady. Deliberate. Approaching the hallway outside. Panic surged through me. Nobody could find me here. Not yet. Not before I understood what all of this meant. I hurried toward the door and reached for the handle. Then the footsteps stopped. Directly outside. Silence followed. Heavy. Waiting. My breath became shallow. Slowly, a shadow appeared beneath the gap at the bottom of the door. Someone was standing there. I did not move. Neither did they. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Then came a gentle knock. Once. Twice. Not threatening. Not angry. Familiar. A voice spoke through the wood. Calm. Deep. Impossible to mistake. Grace, Ethan said quietly. I think it is time we talked. My hand remained frozen on the doorknob. For a moment, I considered pretending the room was empty. Pretending I had never discovered any of this. But Ethan already knew I was there. The silence between us made that painfully obvious. Another few seconds passed before I finally opened the door. Ethan stood in the dim hallway, one hand in his pocket, his expression unreadable. Soft light from a nearby wall sconce outlined the sharp angles of his face. His gaze moved past me into the hidden room, then back to me. Neither of us spoke immediately. How long have you known about this place? I asked quietly. His eyes lingered on the open boxes behind me. Since I was a teenager. The answer surprised me. Then why is it locked? A shadow crossed his face. Because after my mother died, nobody wanted to talk about anything connected to this room. His voice carried a weight I had not heard before. Not anger. Not bitterness. Something closer to disappointment. I looked back at the shelves. My mother knew about it. I know. The words hit me harder than I expected. I turned sharply toward him. You know? Ethan nodded once. I recognized her the moment I saw you staring at that photograph. My heart pounded. Then why did you not say anything? Because I was not certain. He stepped into the room slowly. At first I thought it was impossible. Then I saw the necklace. His eyes settled briefly on the chain beneath my collar. My mother had one just like it. I swallowed hard. Who were they? For the first time, Ethan looked genuinely uncertain. That is what I have been trying to understand for nearly 20 years. The room fell silent again. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, an old grandfather clock chimed midnight. Ethan moved toward the desk and picked up the photograph I had been studying earlier. His thumb brushed the frame. Everyone told me your mother was an employee. He looked at the picture. But whenever I asked my mother about her, she changed the subject. My mother never talked about this family at all, I admitted. Not once. Ethan gave a faint nod, as if that answer confirmed something he already suspected. Then his attention shifted toward the open storage box beside me. The letters. The documents. The hidden pieces of two families connected by a secret neither of us fully understood. Carefully, He lifted the top envelope. The paper had yellowed with age. Across the front, written in elegant handwriting, were two names. Olivia Carter. Sarah Sullivan. My breath caught instantly. Olivia, Ethan's mother. Sarah, my mother. The letter had been addressed from one woman to the other. Ethan slowly opened it. We stood shoulder to shoulder reading the first faded lines beneath the soft glow of the desk lamp. Dear Sarah, if you are reading this, it means I have finally decided to protect the truth. The room seemed to shrink around us. Neither of us moved. Neither of us breathed. Ethan continued reading silently for several seconds before his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. His jaw tightened. His eyes sharpened. What is it? I whispered. He looked up at me slowly, then back at the letter. Grace, he said quietly. According to this, our mothers were hiding the same secret, and somebody else in this house knew about it the entire time. The words settled over the room like a cold fog. Somebody else in this house knew about it the entire time. I stared at Ethan, searching his face for answers, but he looked just as unsettled as I felt. He lowered the letter and carefully unfolded the second page. The paper crackled softly in the silence. We both leaned closer beneath the warm glow of the desk lamp. Dear Sarah, if circumstances force us apart, remember what we promised. The girls must never learn the truth until the right time. The key will protect what remains. My pulse hammered against my ribs. The girls. Plural. Ethan read the next line twice before speaking. There were 2 children. His voice was barely above a whisper. I swallowed hard. You and me? He did not answer immediately. Instead, he continued reading. Several sections had faded beyond recognition, but scattered phrases remained visible. Trust no one. Keep the documents hidden. Eleanor knows everything. Ethan froze. Eleanor. The name felt familiar. Then I remembered. The elegant older woman I had collided with in the hallway. The woman who had stared at my necklace. Who is Eleanor? I asked. Ethan slowly looked up. Eleanor Whitmore. My stomach dropped. Mrs. Whitmore? He nodded. She worked for my family before I was born. She was my mother's closest friend. Suddenly, dozens of moments snapped together inside my mind. Her reaction when she saw the necklace. The concern in her eyes. The way she seemed to recognize me instantly. She had known. Maybe not everything, but enough. Ethan carefully returned the letter to the desk. We need to talk to her. Tonight. Tonight. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows as we left the hidden room together. The mansion felt different now. Every hallway seemed filled with secrets. Every shadow seemed to be hiding a memory waiting to be uncovered. We crossed the east wing in silence. Neither of us knew exactly what we would say. Neither of us knew what answers we were about to receive. The grandfather clock in the main hall read 12:37 in the morning. Most of the estate had gone dark hours earlier. Only a few lamps remained lit. We found Mrs. Whitmore in her private office reviewing paperwork. She looked up when we entered. The moment her eyes landed on the letter in Ethan's hand, all color drained from her face. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then she slowly removed her reading glasses and set them on the desk. I wondered how long it would take, she said quietly. My heart nearly stopped. Ethan stepped forward. You knew about this. Mrs. Whitmore closed her eyes briefly. Yes. You knew about Grace. Not at first. Her gaze shifted toward me. Sadness filled her expression. But the necklace confirmed what I feared. I could barely breathe. Then tell me who my mother really was. The older woman's eyes glistened. She looked from me to Ethan and back again. 20 years of silence seemed to hang between us. Finally, she rose from her chair and walked toward a locked cabinet against the wall. From inside, she removed a small wooden box covered in dust. She carried it back to the desk and placed it carefully in front of us. Everything began with this, she whispered. My hands trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside rested 2 birth certificates. One carried Ethan's name. The other carried mine. And for the first time in my life, I realized the man standing beside me might be connected to my past in a way neither of us had ever imagined. The room seemed to tilt around me. I stared at the 2 birth certificates lying side by side inside the wooden box. My name. Ethan's name. 2 documents separated by only a few months. My pulse roared in my ears. Mrs. Whitmore lowered herself into her chair as though the weight of 2 decades had suddenly returned to her shoulders. You both deserve the truth, she said quietly. Nobody interrupted her. Rain continued tapping against the windows while the old clock in the hallway marked each passing second. 26 years ago, Olivia Carter and Sarah Sullivan were inseparable. They met in college. They built dreams together. They promised that no matter where life took them, they would remain family. I glanced at Ethan. He looked just as stunned as I felt. Mrs. Whitmore opened a worn photo album from the box. Page after page revealed images of two young women laughing on beaches, celebrating birthdays, holding newborn babies. The photographs felt more intimate than anything I had ever seen. When Ethan was born, Olivia asked Sarah to become his godmother. Mrs. Whitmore continued. A year later, when you were born, Grace, Olivia returned the honor. My throat tightened. Family, not by blood, but something close to it. Mrs. Whitmore carefully turned another page. A photograph slipped loose and drifted onto the desk. In the picture, a young Ethan sat beside a toddler with bright eyes and light brown curls. Me. My breath caught instantly. That is impossible, I whispered. I would remember. Mrs. Whitmore shook her head gently. You were barely 3 years old. Ethan picked up the photograph with trembling fingers. His gaze lingered on the image for a long moment. I remember this garden, he said quietly. I remember the swing set. He looked at me. But I do not remember you. Strangely, that admission hurt more than I expected. Not because he had forgotten me. Because part of me had always felt like something was missing, and now I was staring directly at it. Mrs. Whitmore folded her hands together. Everything changed after a disagreement between two powerful business families. The room grew still. Olivia and Sarah discovered information that could have damaged important reputations. Nothing illegal, nothing dangerous, but enough to create consequences that neither woman wanted for their children. So they disappeared? Ethan asked. Mrs. Whitmore nodded. Sarah chose to leave New York. Olivia chose to protect the secret. I looked down at the necklace beneath my sweater. Suddenly the key made sense. It had never been about money. It had never been about inheritance. It had been a promise. A way back to the truth. Then why keep us apart? I asked. Mrs. Whitmore's expression softened. Because they believed they were protecting you. The answer felt both comforting and heartbreaking. Ethan slowly opened another envelope from the box. A folded note slipped into his hand. Unlike the others, this one had been written much later. The handwriting looked rushed. Emotional. Olivia's handwriting. Ethan unfolded it carefully. As his eyes moved across the page, every trace of color drained from his face. My stomach tightened instantly. What is it? I asked. He looked up slowly. This letter was written a week before my mother died. Mrs. Whitmore froze. Ethan swallowed hard. Then he read the final sentence aloud. If Grace ever returns to Carter Manor, tell her she was never supposed to arrive alone. Silence crashed over the room. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because for the first time, it became terrifyingly clear that someone else was supposed to come back with me. Someone who had vanished from this story long before I ever knew it existed. The words echoed through my mind long after Ethan lowered the letter. She was never supposed to arrive alone. I stared at the faded page, hoping I had misunderstood. But the sentence remained unchanged. Somebody else had been part of this story from the beginning. Somebody important enough for Olivia Carter to mention in one of the last letters she ever wrote. Mrs. Whitmore looked equally shaken. She reached for the note with trembling fingers and read the line again. I have never seen this letter before, she whispered. Olivia must have hidden it herself. Ethan leaned against the desk, his expression distant. For the first time since I had met him, he looked less like a billionaire who controlled entire industries and more like a son searching for answers he should have received years ago. Who else could she have meant? I asked quietly. Nobody answered immediately. Rain continued falling outside while the old mansion settled around us with soft creaks and distant echoes. Finally, Mrs. Whitmore opened another folder from the wooden box. Inside were photographs, receipts, and handwritten notes. Most appeared ordinary. Then one photograph slipped free and landed face up on the desk. My breath caught. The picture showed my mother standing beside Olivia Carter. They were younger than in the other photographs. Happier somehow. Between them stood two children, Ethan, and another little boy about the same age. Ethan grabbed the photograph instantly. That is impossible. His voice sounded strained. Who is he? I stared at the image. The boy had dark blonde hair and bright blue eyes. There was something familiar about him. Something that made the back of my neck tingle. Mrs. Whitmore slowly sat down. The color had drained from her face again. I hoped that photograph was gone. Ethan looked at her sharply. You know who he is. Silence answered him. Then, after several painful seconds, she nodded. His name was Daniel. The room grew still. Ethan frowned. I have never heard that name before. Because nobody was supposed to tell you. My pulse quickened. Mrs. Whitmore looked toward the rain-streaked window before continuing. Daniel was the son of Olivia's younger sister. Ethan stared at her. My cousin. Yes. He looked back at the photograph. What happened to him? Mrs. Whitmore closed her eyes briefly. That is where everything became complicated. She opened a drawer and removed a thin manila envelope. Across the front, written in black ink, was a date from 20 years earlier. She slid it across the desk. Ethan opened it carefully. Inside was a newspaper clipping. Not a dramatic headline. Not a scandal. Just a short community article announcing that a family had relocated unexpectedly from New York to Oregon. One name appeared in the article. Daniel Hayes. My stomach tightened. He left. I asked. Mrs. Whitmore shook her head slowly. That is what everyone was told. Ethan looked up. You mean it was not true? Her eyes met his. The family never went to Oregon. The silence that followed felt endless. Ethan lowered the clipping onto the desk. Then where did they go? Mrs. Whitmore swallowed hard. That is the question your mother spent years trying to answer. My heart began pounding again, because suddenly the final line of Olivia's letter made terrifying sense. Somebody else had been meant to return with me. Somebody connected to the hidden photographs. Somebody whose disappearance had never truly been explained. And for the first time, I realized our search was no longer about the past. It was about finding a person who might still be out there. None of us slept that night. By dawn, the rain had stopped, but the storm inside Carter Manor had only begun. The wooden box remained open on Mrs. Whitmore's desk while sunlight slowly crept across the room. Ethan stood near the window reviewing every document we had uncovered. I sat across from him, trying to make sense of a story that seemed to grow more complicated with every answer. Daniel Hayes, the missing cousin, the child who was supposed to return with me. The name repeated endlessly in my thoughts. Mrs. Whitmore finally broke the silence. There is something else I never told either of you. Ethan lowered the file in his hands. At this point, I would be surprised if there was not. The older woman managed a tired smile before opening another folder from the cabinet. Unlike the others, this one looked newer. The papers inside were not 20 years old. Some were only a few years old. My pulse quickened immediately. What is that? I asked. Mrs. Whitmore hesitated. Then she slid a photograph across the desk. The image showed a young man standing outside a bookstore somewhere in Boston. He appeared to be in his late 20s. Dark blonde hair. Blue eyes. The resemblance to the child in the old photograph was unmistakable. Ethan stared at the image. Daniel. Mrs. Whitmore nodded slowly. I received this 6 years ago. The room went silent. My heart hammered against my ribs. You knew where he was? I asked. Not exactly. She folded her hands together. The photograph arrived without a return address. No explanation. Nothing except a note. Ethan immediately reached for the paper attached behind the image. The note contained only one sentence. I am safe. Do not look for me. Ethan read it twice. Then a third time. Why would he send this? Mrs. Whitmore looked away. Because somebody had already spent years looking for him. A strange feeling settled over me. The pieces were beginning to connect, but not in the way I expected. Who was searching? I asked quietly. Mrs. Whitmore met my eyes. Your mother. Every breath left my lungs. Ethan looked equally stunned. Sarah was searching for Daniel? For years. Mrs. Whitmore nodded. After both families separated, Sarah never believed the official story. She thought Daniel had been hidden deliberately. The room seemed smaller somehow. More crowded. Filled with ghosts and unanswered questions. Ethan walked toward the bookshelf and stopped. Then my mother was right. About what? I asked. He turned toward me slowly. You were never supposed to arrive alone because your mother believed Daniel would eventually find you. My stomach tightened. Find me. Ethan nodded. According to these letters, the two of you shared something before the families disappeared. He handed me another faded photograph. My hands trembled as I took it. The image showed 3 children sitting together beneath a large oak tree. Ethan, Daniel, me. On the back, written in Olivia's handwriting, were 4 simple words. The 3 who returned. I stared at the sentence until it blurred. 3. Not 2. 3. Suddenly, every letter. Every photograph, every hidden clue pointed toward the same conclusion. Olivia and Sarah had not spent years protecting a secret. They had spent years waiting for something. Or someone. Then Ethan reached into the bottom of the box and pulled out a sealed envelope neither of us had noticed before. Across the front was a date from only 3 months earlier. Not 20 years ago. 3 months. And beneath it, written in careful handwriting, was a single name. Grace Sullivan. The envelope felt heavier than paper should have felt. My name stared back at me from the front in careful handwriting that had survived years without fading. For several seconds, nobody moved. The morning sun stretched across the desk, illuminating dust particles drifting through the air like tiny fragments of the past refusing to disappear. Ethan was the first to break the silence. Open it. My hands trembled as I reached for the seal. Part of me wanted to leave it unopened forever. Because once I read whatever was inside, there would be no going back. The answers I had spent my entire life chasing were finally within reach. Slowly, I unfolded the letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Not my mother's. Not Olivia's. Someone else's. Dear Grace, if this letter has reached you, then the key has done its job. The room seemed to disappear around me. I continued reading. You do not know me, but we met once when we were children. You were too young to remember. I remember enough for both of us. My pulse quickened. Ethan stepped closer, reading over my shoulder. The letter continued. By the time you find this, I will probably still be searching for the same answers that brought you to Carter Manor. Your mother and Olivia believed that one day the three of us would return to finish what they started. They never told us everything, but they left clues. The final clue is not hidden in New York. It never was. Mrs. Whitmore leaned forward. What does it mean? I kept reading. If you are standing beside Ethan Carter, tell him his mother was right about the journal. It exists, and it contains the truth they were protecting. I stopped breathing. Ethan's eyes widened. The journal. Mrs. Whitmore looked stunned. Olivia kept a journal for years. Ethan turned toward her. You told me it disappeared. Because I believed it had. The room erupted with questions all at once. But I forced myself to continue reading. The journal was hidden where the three of us last stood together. Beneath the oak tree. The one from the photograph. I stared at the words. Beneath the oak tree. Ethan immediately grabbed the old photograph from the desk. The image of 3 children sitting beneath the enormous tree suddenly felt less like a memory and more like a map. My eyes returned to the final lines. If you find this letter, do not waste time searching for me. Find the journal first. Everything depends on it. And if fate is kinder than it has been for the last 20 years, perhaps the three of us will finally stand together again. Signed, Daniel Hayes. Silence filled the office. Complete. Absolute. Then Ethan looked up from the photograph. His expression had changed. The uncertainty was gone. In its place stood determination. I know where that tree is. My heart jumped. You do? He nodded. The original Carter property. 40 miles north of here. Mrs. Whitmore slowly sank back into her chair. Olivia used to take all of you there every summer. Ethan folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his pocket. Then he looked directly at me. Grace, I think we finally know what our mothers wanted us to find. I glanced down at the photograph one more time. 3 children smiling beneath an oak tree. 3 lives separated by decades of secrets. And somewhere beneath that tree, hidden for 20 years, waited a journal that could change everything. 2 hours later, Ethan and I were driving north beneath a sky washed clean by the previous night's rain. The highway stretched ahead in long silver ribbons while autumn leaves blurred past the windows in shades of gold and crimson. Neither of us spoke much. The letter sat folded inside Ethan's jacket pocket. Daniel's words felt like a compass pointing us towards something neither of us fully understood. By late afternoon, we reached the original Carter property. Time had not been kind to it. The main house stood empty behind iron gates coated with rust. Wild grass covered what had once been carefully maintained gardens. Yet despite the decay, the place carried a strange sense of familiarity, as though memories still lingered beneath every branch and stone. Ethan parked near the entrance and stared through the windshield. I have not been here in almost 20 years. His voice sounded distant. I looked toward the rolling fields beyond the house. Do you remember the tree? A faint smile touched his face. I remember climbing it. We spent nearly an hour searching the property. Old pathways disappeared beneath weeds. Garden walls had partially collapsed. Several times I wondered if the journal had already been lost to time. Then we reached the far edge of the estate. The moment I saw the enormous oak tree, I knew. The trunk was massive. Its branches stretched across nearly 60 feet of open ground. Sunlight filtered through thousands of leaves, scattering golden patterns across the earth. Ethan stopped beside me. Neither of us spoke. The photograph from the box suddenly felt alive in my mind. 3 children. 1 tree. 1 secret waiting beneath it. This is it, he said quietly. We began searching around the roots. At first we found nothing except rocks and fallen leaves. Then Ethan noticed something unusual. A section of ground near the trunk seemed slightly raised, as though someone had disturbed the soil years earlier. My pulse quickened immediately. Together we cleared away leaves and loose dirt. Within minutes, Ethan's hand struck something solid. Wood. Carefully, we uncovered a small, weathered container protected beneath layers of earth. My heart hammered so loudly I could barely hear anything else. Ethan lifted the box onto the grass. For several seconds, we simply stared at it. 20 years of questions rested inside. Slowly, he opened the lid. The journal was there, wrapped in waterproof cloth, perfectly preserved. Neither of us moved. Finally, Ethan unwrapped it and opened the first page. Olivia Carter's handwriting filled the paper. The opening entry was dated 21 years earlier. We read silently together. If you are reading this, then the children have found each other again. Relief washed through me. Not because of what the journal said, because somehow Olivia had believed this day would come. Ethan turned several pages. His eyes widened suddenly. Grace. I looked up. What? He handed me the journal. Folded between 2 pages was a recent photograph. Not 20 years old. Not faded. Recent. My breath caught instantly. The image showed a man standing beside a bookstore in Boston. Older now. Early 30s. Blue eyes. Dark blonde hair. Daniel. Written across the back were 6 words in unmistakable handwriting. I finally know where she is. Beneath the sentence was a date. 3 weeks before I arrived at Carter Manor. The drive back from the old property felt completely different. The journal rested safely between Ethan and me, yet neither of us opened it again. We did not need to. The final clue had already changed everything. Daniel had known where I was. Not 20 years ago. Not 5 years ago. 3 weeks ago. The realization followed me like a shadow. By the time we returned to Carter Manor, evening had settled across the estate. Golden light glowed through the windows. For the first time since arriving, the mansion no longer felt intimidating. It felt familiar, almost like a place waiting for someone to come home. Ethan and I spent the next several hours reading the remaining pages of Olivia's journal. The truth turned out to be far simpler than the mystery surrounding it. There had been no fortune hidden away, no scandal, no dangerous secret. Olivia and Sarah had spent years protecting something much more valuable. A promise. They believed that friendship, loyalty, and family were stronger than distance, time, and circumstance. They feared the world would eventually pull the 3 children apart. So they left clues behind. Not to protect wealth, to protect connection. Near midnight, I reached the final page. Olivia's handwriting remained steady despite the years. If you are reading this, then fate has succeeded where we failed. The children found their way back to one another. Do not waste your life searching for what was lost. Build something beautiful with what remains. Tears blurred my vision. Beside me, Ethan quietly closed the journal. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Outside, the fountain in the garden murmured softly beneath the stars. Finally, a phone vibrated on the desk. Ethan glanced at the screen. His expression changed instantly. What is it? I asked. He looked up. A message. My heart skipped. From who? He turned the phone toward me. Unknown number. Attached was a photograph. The image showed a familiar bookstore in Boston. Standing in front of it was Daniel. Older. Smiling. Alive. Beneath the photograph were 8 simple words. Took you too long enough to find me. I laughed and cried at the same time. For the first time in days, the weight pressing against my chest disappeared. Daniel was real. He was safe. And somehow, he had been watching the story unfold all along. Several weeks later, life settled into a new rhythm. Daniel agreed to meet us. The reunion was everything our mothers had hoped for. 3 lives separated by decades finally crossed paths again. Yet the greatest surprise was not finding Daniel. It was realizing what I had found in myself. I had arrived at Carter Manor believing I was chasing answers about the past. Instead, I discovered belonging, purpose, family. One evening, as the sun dipped below the Hudson River, Ethan and I stood beneath the same oak tree from the photograph. The wind moved gently through the leaves overhead. "Funny," he said quietly. "What?" He smiled. "You came here looking for a secret." I looked toward the horizon. "And you?" I thought I already knew my destiny. The silence between us felt comfortable, honest, warm. Then he glanced toward me. Turns out we were both wrong. For the first time, I understood exactly what he meant. Sometimes the answers we spend years searching for are not hidden in locked rooms or buried beneath old trees. Sometimes they arrive disguised as ordinary moments, ordinary people, a chance encounter that changes everything. And sometimes destiny does not lead us to what we lost. Sometimes it leads us home.